All right, good morning, good afternoon, good evening from whatever part of the world you are joining us today. I am Mark Mungal, speaking to you from the Caribbean island state of Trinidad and Tobago. Welcome to the second in our World Rowing webinar series around safeguarding and protection of persons involved in rowing. Before we move forward, just a quick one about our panelists for today. We'll be joined by Dr. Lenka, who is a World Rowing Council member. She's previously served on the executive committee and chair of the Athletes Commission. Lenka, I'm pretty certain many of you will already know, is a former world champion. She's represented Germany at 3 Olympic Games, competing in the coxless pairs and the coxed eights. Lenka is currently a member of the World Anti-Doping Agency Health, Medical and Research Committee. Good to have you on board, Lenka. We'll also be joined by Frida. Frida is the current chair of the Athletes Commission and a member of the World Rowing Executive Committee. Frida is also a former world champion in the women's single scull, and she's represented Sweden at 3 Olympic Games. Welcome on board, Frida. And my brother Mehdi is the continental rep for Africa. He's a member of the World Rowing Council. He's also a member of the Youth Rowing Commission. Mehdi is presently serving as the technical director and the national rowing coach for the United Arab Emirates. Good to have you on board, Mehdi. And finally, we'll also be joined by my colleague, Professor Emeritus Sandi Kirby. Sandi, if you were joined us for the earlier webinar, Sandi represented there, and she comes with a wealth of knowledge as a pioneer researcher and academic in the field of sexual harassment and abuse in sports. Sandi also serves on the leadership of Safe Sport International and herself a former Olympic rower. So we're fortunate to have a pretty strong panel joining us today for our second in the webinar series. Couple of housekeeping matters, and just to know that the first webinar we kind of focus on building a foundation and a platform, clarifying some of the myths and talking a little bit about what exactly safeguarding is, kind of laying the foundation for the webinar this week and then next week. Today we'll focus on the athlete and coach perspectives and creating that safe environment. For the first half an hour or so, we'll have a pre-recorded video. We'll hear from our president, World Rowing President, Jean-Christophe Roland. He'll be followed by the IOC Medical and Scientific Director, Dr. Richard Budget. And then we'll hear some interviews that Lenka did with a few guest speakers, some really informative and interesting perspectives. And then that will be followed by a live Q&A with the panelists who I just introduced. During that time, you'll have the opportunity to ask questions, and we ask you to use the question and answer section if you have questions that you'd like to throw at the panelists. You can have a conversation as well in the comment section, but we ask you in the chat section, that is, but we ask you that you use the Q&A for your questions. And please make sure that your questions are not of a personal nature. If you do have concerns, you can reach out to us at safeguarding@worldrowing.com. So you can email us at safeguarding@worldrowing.com if you have any personal matter. But for the Q&A, we ask that you avoid using the names of individuals or of organizations and so on. Let's keep that anonymous and as general as possible. Also, we ask that you type your questions in English. And just to note as well that this webinar will be recorded. Before we go to that pre-recorded, note that safeguarding and abuse, discussions of abuse and harassment can be very personal to some people, including some of you listening in and participating in this webinar. If you feel that this is bothering you, if you are affected by any of the discussions raised during the webinar, we encourage you to seek out professional help and support. If you need to, you can connect with us here via email at safeguarding@worldrowing.com. And a reminder again that if you raise questions referring to a particular incident or situation, please avoid using the names of persons or organizations involved, okay? All right, so We're happy now to introduce you to, first of all, our president, the president of World Rowing, Jean-Christophe Roland, who
Dear
will
rowing
do some
friends,
introductions,
it's my great
make some
pleasure to
introductory
welcome you
remarks,
to
and he'll
this
be followed
webinar
by Dr.
on the
Richard Budget
subject
of the
of
IOC Medical
safeguarding.
and Scientific Commission,
World
and then
Rowing
the
believes
interviews that
that
Lenka has
it's a
done for us
fundamental
leading up to
right
this. So over to you,
of all
Brian. Let's listen
individuals
first of all
with
to
World
the World Rowing
Rowing to
President,
be able to
Jean-Christophe Roland.
participate in a non-violent, safe and respectful environment. Harassment and abuse should have no place in society, and especially in the world of sport and in rowing. But the sad reality is that harassment and abuse occurs across all sectors of society and across all sports. As you will hear in the next video clip from the IOC Medical and Scientific Director, Dr. Richard Budget, by the way, a 1984 Olympic gold medalist in the men's coxed 4. World Rowing acknowledges its duty of care in this regard, and it's committed to creating and supporting the environment and a culture free of harassment and abuse. The welfare of all participants involved with world rowing is paramount. Behavior and actions that constitute harassment and abuse cannot be tolerated, and safeguarding participants is the priority for us. And it is the responsibility of all involved in rowing, the council and commission members, leaders of member federations, officials, athletes, coaches, entourage, organizing committees. We each have a responsibility in this regard. At the beginning of 2018, we established a safeguarding working group whose role has been to develop for our organization a policy and procedures in that matter. The FISA safeguarding policy and procedures were approved by the Council and came into effect in February 2019. Since then, the Safeguarding Working Group has implemented initiatives to raise awareness of harassment and abuse and to educate our communities on how to create a safe environment to all participants. I must say that the Athletes Commission has been at the heart of this work since the outset, supported by the Sports Medicine Commission, and has been instrumental in the development of the policy and procedures, and equally in the communication on these matters across the athlete community. Again, everyone in our sport, each of us, has a responsibility to ensure the participants in rowing are safe and protected at all times from harassment and abuse. So thank you very much for participating in the World Rowing Safeguarding webinars, and I hope that you will find them useful. Thank you.
I'm Dr. Richard Budget, the Medical and Scientific Director of the IOC. Now, in 2016, the IOC convened a consensus meeting of experts on prevention of harassment and abuse in sport. And they published the conclusions. And these conclusions are that it's incumbent on every stakeholder in sport to put in place safe sport initiatives, including appropriate policies and procedures, because it's our duty to enable every athlete to be respected and also to prevent the risk of non-accidental injury. The IOC takes safeguarding very seriously, and as a result have put in place a toolbox which is constantly updated with videos, with documentation, with training for the use by international federations to help them in this really important area.
Hello, welcome to the second webinar on prevention of harassment and abuse from World Rowing. This webinar is aimed at athletes, coaches, but also all other interested people We will start this webinar with a few videos covering different aspects of safeguarding. This will be followed then by a panel discussion where we will try to answer your question. If you have questions, please write them into the chat and we will try to pick them up in the panel session. Having now been retired for quite a while and had time to reflect upon my active career and also talking to other athletes, I came to realize that I was doing best and developing best by training in a healthy and nurturing environment. I also trained in hard training squads with a lot of pressure and hard competition, but surprisingly, that didn't make me go any faster. Only when I was coached by a coach who not only saw me as a performance machine, but also saw the students and the person behind me, I could develop my full potential. I believe many athletes have had the same experience. This is the reason why the first part of this webinar will be focusing on how to create a safe environment in rowing. We will be then touching on different forms of harassment, and we will learn about signs of abuse and how to react to them. We will end the first part about speaking about the effects harassment can have on victims. We will start off with some insight about how to create a safe environment for athletes and coaches. We have Janine Stevens talking. Janine had a long and successful career in rowing. She finished off with a silver medal in the women's 8 at the London Olympics in 2012. She has then turned to coaching, is now the head coach in Manitoba, Canada, where she helps athletes to reach their full potential. She will share with us her ideas on coaching.
When I was finished competing and I first got into coaching, what I realized is that I not only coach rowers, but I actually coach people. In that, I wanted to create a safe space around the boathouse, a safe space where people could come and be themselves, whatever that meant to them. Sometimes that leads to success, but sometimes that leads to failure. I wanted them to know that failure was okay and we could use that as an opportunity for learning and for growth. I also wanted to create a safe space where people felt supported. The next thing I did was I really thought long and hard about my values. What were my coaching values that I wanted to have around the boathouse? And at the top of the list was respect. I wanted to create a respectful environment where I showed respect to others, whether that's the athletes I work with, their parents, the board of directors, and the other coaches. I also pay a lot of attention to my communication. How do you communicate with others? Do you use language and phrases that help build people up, that try and draw greatness from those around you? Do you use clear language? Pay attention to the language that you're using. Know your athletes. The third thing I did was to make sure that I got to know not only the athletes as rowers, but them as people. Who are the people that you work with? What are their passions outside of the boathouse? What are they taking in school? What does their family look like? If you spend the time getting to know the people behind your athletes, if they have a question or a concern or something that's bothering them, they'll come to you and they'll feel safe and comfortable talking to you about it. I've been able to create a culture of safety and of support, bringing my values of respect and communication, positive communication, and really getting to know the athletes has had a significant impact, not only on the people that I work with, but also the performances that they're able to put forward. I truly believe that making great people and on focusing in on what makes people great will also make great rowers. I hope that you can do the same. Good luck.
Thank you for this great piece on safe environment, Janine. Now, some people might say that athletes need to be pushed to perform better. I have asked Katie Sadler, who has done some work in various positions on the culture of sport, and about her opinion on this. Katie Sadler is currently the General Manager of World Rugby, responsible for the development of women's rugby worldwide. She represented New Zealand at the 1984 Olympics in synchronized swimming and won a bronze medal at the 1986 Commonwealth Games. She has a long history in sport, driving the transformation of New Zealand high-performance sports system and serving in leading positions on various boards. She shared with me a very interesting formula, and it's P equals M times S times E. So if you're interested, then let's hear from her what this is. Good morning, Katie. Thank you for talking to me. What, in your eyes, is needed to create a good environment for success?
I think there's a really cute formula that I use all the time when I'm talking about athlete performance and environment, and it is P equals M times S times E, where performance equals motivations. So what are the individual motivations times skill? You know, what are the psychological skills? What's the talent that the athlete brings in times environment? And you know, quite often the skill you're gifted with when an athlete comes to work with you, but it's the environment piece that you have to get right. And we all know when you're working with an athlete or a team or a group of athletes, when you've got a great high performance culture, you get better performance than when you have a poor high performance culture. So the environment piece to me is really, really important. And what that means is getting the right kind of level of support and challenge. You know, every environment that you create, it's how much do you support and encourage versus how much do you actually challenge and stretch. And getting that kind of balance right is really a key to high performance.
Brilliant. Yeah, I like your formula. So what can athletes do to facilitate such an environment? Because usually it's the coach who sets the standard, who sets the tone, but what can athletes contribute to that?
Well, I think sometimes it's hard, and it's hard if you've been working in a cultural environment that for quite some time, there's a real imbalance of power between what the coach or the high performance director is driving in a program versus the athletes. You know, you've got to start with talking. At the end of the day, you know, people sitting down and communicating in an appropriate way to actually understand what's going on in situations is just vital. And quite often we don't talk. Athletes maybe haven't been put into that sort of, you know, there's that term we talk about psychological safety, where you're in an environment where you feel that you can ask why without feeling that there's going to be some kind of repercussion because you've done so. But to do that, you have to be brave. And you have to be feel that you can that the organization has created an environment that allows you and encourages athlete input. You know, so moving from you will do what you're told through to as an athlete, I'm a partner in performance, and surely we're working together to achieve excellence in the water.
Well, so, but sometimes, you know, the environment is created, or the negative, bad environment is created by the athletes themselves. Sometimes there's a lot of bullying, a lot of pressure within the team. What can a coach do if a situation like that?
Yeah, well, I think that working on culture is often perceived to be something that's in a too hard basket. And so people actually don't sit down and have those challenging conversations. And so, you know, I often, when I've been working with groups, I've always, at the beginning of a season, sat down with all the stakeholders to work out what I would call a team charter, you know, sitting down and really having an open and honest kind of conversation about what we're trying to achieve, how we're going to do it, and why we're going to do it, so that we all agree what is acceptable and not acceptable in terms of the culture we're trying to create in the team. Culture change isn't a quick fix. You know, it is a learned thing that's happened, you know, quite often over years and years and years. And so to transform a culture from a negative, backstabbing, playing below the line type of culture to one that is positive, supportive, shared responsibility does take time, but it's definitely doable.
Great. Okay, thank you very much. There was a lot of input that we can definitely think about and then maybe take it to the panel discussion. Great stuff. Thank you, Katie, for that. I think the first two speakers made it clear that establishing a good environment without sacrificing performance is possible and actually desirable. Coming to our next speakers, we will examine a few situations where harassment is happening in the rowing world. We might not have had major cases who made the headlines like other sports, but let's face it, if you look around us, we see a lot of what I like to call day-to-day harassment. We should not underestimate the destructive power of those forms of mental and psychological violence, as they also leave deep scars and might keep people turn away from our wonderful sport of rowing. I would like to hand over to Emma Twigg. Emma Twigg is a New Zealand rower and 3 times Olympian. Among many achievements, she won a World Championship title in a single scull in the 2014 World Championships. She has a degree in management, law, and humanities of sport. Emma has worked at the heart of the Olympic movement, the IOC in Lausanne. She has recently returned to rowing and aiming for her 4th Olympic game. In the next video, she will be talking about harassment due to sexual orientation, but also about the integrative power of a sport.
Hi everyone, my name is Emma Twigg from the New Zealand rowing team. Now, sport has the power to connect global communities. It has the power to access different cultures, disabilities, religions, and social backgrounds. It's one of the things that I love about sport, and specifically about our sport. As an openly gay rower, I myself have gone through a process of self-acceptance and then a process of acceptance of those around me. I've experienced only positivity and inclusion since coming out and can proudly say that I've always felt part of the rowing community. Unfortunately though, I know that this isn't the experience of every athlete or every athlete in our sport. Elite sport can sometimes be a brutal breeding ground for prejudice, stereotyping, discrimination, and harassment. And rowing demands the highest level of physical and psychological strength. Races are won by the tiniest of margins, environments are competitive, and athletes are willing to sacrifice it all to achieve their goals. This sometimes means putting up with treatment that is unacceptable. And in some instances, situations where there's a power differential between athlete and the entourage can lead to harassment and other forms of abuse. Changing the way that we frame our language with athletes is one way of combating negative environments. Sometimes a flippant remark that you might not have intended to be negative or harmful can do some of the most damage. And I'd urge you all to think about the impact that your words can have on athletes. Crude remarks, singling someone out, talking down or belittling someone, they're all examples of harassment. And in the case of LGBT youth and those struggling with their sexuality, derogatory language with reference to their sexuality can be extremely harmful, and in many cases will leave athletes feeling vulnerable, hurt, and in some cases hindering that process of self-acceptance. I think the thing to remember in all of this is that an athlete that is free of noise and stress in their personal lives and their training environments is only going to make a faster athlete on the water. The job of the athlete entourage is to create supportive and encouraging environments that will bring out the best in an athlete, not to make them question their involvement in our sport. Inclusion and empowerment bring social change, and we know that. And we need to work hard to create environments where every difference is embraced. There are a number of research papers that suggest that a lack of acceptance can be a barrier to an athlete staying in the sport or even starting in a sport, be it feeling comfortable with their skin colour, their religious beliefs, sexuality, or a disability. There is a direct link to minority groups and their likelihood to get involved in sport for fear of harassment or feeling excluded. And sport is about community, right? It's about community and spirit. And we should be working hard to make sure that our sport is accessible to everyone that wants to give it a go. We need to make sure that athletes feel safe, supported, and accepted.
Another form of harassment which can occur in athletes relationship is bullying. Bullying has the power to destroy the stability of teams and single persons out or groups, which in a team sport like rowing is never a good idea. We will hear now from Johan Flodin about how to handle bullying in a team and how to resolve if such a situation occurs. Johan is currently the head coach of the Norway Rowing Federation. In this position, he's hugely successful, having coached athletes to 2 bronze medals at the Olympic Games and 13 World Championship medals. And he's still going very strong. He has a long history in coaching since 1990 and has a reputation of bringing the best out of his athletes. He has a master in exercise physiology and has a degree in work on organizational psychology. Over to Johan.
I am really happy that you have chosen to explore the important topic of safeguarding. I know it's a very important topic in sports, but even though many people actually have found safe ground in sport, in our sport, even when being bullied elsewhere. And my experience, of course, is that bullying and lack of safeguarding can occur in any sports environment. And I have had to handle a few occasions of especially bullying myself. The times that when I experience bullying, it's often started with a small and pretty basic discussion on technique, on placing in the boat, on selections and so on. And I feel that when I have earlier on been in lack of information and been a little bit unclear myself about how we're going to handle and inform about how we're going to handle the situation about selections and seating and so on, it has easier occurred bullying in the end. And therefore, a small discussion can be kind of when people start to seek in loyalties and talking bad about each other, and I haven't recognized that early enough, and then people can get silent treatment, and behind the back is occurring. Of course, the healing way is always to communicate, but when it has grown this strong, it often takes several meetings, and it's to solve it, both interviews with individuals and with part of the group and the whole group, actually to find back to a good environment again. These are strong individuals, and everybody doesn't have to be best friends, but it has to be a group where everybody can safely develop and to be even for results, but also to prevent people to be feeling really bad and have to leave the group. When there's a lack of open discussion, where I haven't been informative enough, and where the group has had to live their life a little bit on their own, and small problems which I have not seen or neglected has been growing to really big problems. So now we're working with the group a couple of times a year, where we actually ask ourselves, how do we want our environment to be created within the group? What are the behaviors that we can expect? What is the behaviors that we're trying to avoid? And we call this our goals for behavior, who actually is our focus to maintain during tough periods. These goals are accepted and known to everybody, and we actually put this sheet up on our training site in the tent, where when we are on the competitions, in the hotel rooms, when we are on training camps. So and we evaluate them at least once a year, and everybody who comes into the group has to live with these rules and have to know these rules for the first year, and then they of course will take part of creating new rules for the next year. I believe that the coach and the leaders are really important to maintain a good training environment, and to me it has been educational to learn how to early on see these problems in an early stage, and also learn to be brave, because if you neglect them at an early stage, there might be worse problems in the end. So I think that you people are really important to create environment who is really good for your athletes, kids or grown-ups or top elite athletes. In my opinion, there is no guarantee that the best athletes are the best on handling this. So be brave and good luck.
In the next video, we will be talking about peer pressure and peer-to-peer violence. We will hear from Hannah Avery Hall on this topic. Hannah Avery Hall has a long time experience as an international rower. She won the 2002 World Championships in a world record time, and in 2014 a silver medal at the World Championships. She represented Australia in the 2012 Olympics in London. She's a qualified dietitian, and now, after ending her active career, turned to coaching rowers in Melbourne. So she has both views, both as an athlete, but also as a coach. So over to Hannah.
Hi, I'm here to talk to you today about peer pressure and peer abuse in rowing and how it fits into safeguarding and protection of our athletes. What is peer pressure or peer abuse in rowing? And it's the rituals or the unwritten rules that are put into training and put into a training environment. And it could be things like that the new person in the crew or the new person in the squad has to wash the boats, has to collect the oars, has to put down the oars, has to fill drink bottles. It could be unwritten rules that are targeted at individuals that are different or new to the environment or to the squad. And it can be banter. It could be the brunt of jokes constantly and repeatedly from people all the time. So it's often a way of stamping authority or showing power, and it's more an insecurity than it is trying to be better. It's people feeling threatened. So it often happens when competition is heightened and people feel threatened, and hence why it's elite athletes are at higher risk of these things. So, peer pressure or peer abuse can take different forms. It can be, as I said, it could be verbaling, it could be ritual. Today there's cyberbullying. There's generally always a way to get to somebody, and trying to embarrass or humiliate people through joking what they would perceive as joking, but it seems to happen all the time to the same person. In the social scenario, it could be pressuring people to drink or even worse, take drugs in a social environment to say you've got to fit, if you want to fit in, that's how you fit in. So, but I think it's important to know that there is a positive side to peer pressure, and a positive side, that's often the team buildings where you may have been a part of it yourself, where you can fail, but that people will pick you back up and support you when you come back to it. But you all are striving to do the same thing, and people sort of pressure you in the right way, but it's not by any stretch making you feel inferior or not capable. Going back to that, it's a sense of equal, like it doesn't matter where you fit in the pecking order of performance within that environment, you're all equals. So that's where team building and peer pressure can be a positive thing. So there is a very difference between a negative peer pressure and positive peer pressure, which is team building and team growth. But it's when sort of you are humiliated and degraded in your environment. And it tends to create a division and a cultural divide within a squad or within an environment. You know, I don't think that there's any easy way to cut it out. But what I do believe in is that the more we are educated with regards that it's not okay and what it actually is, and if you don't feel okay, the chances are that it's not okay. So I believe it's an education to understand the issue, and then an education to have the strength to stand up for it, because it's not often easier if you are the one that's being pressured or abused to stand up. It takes those that are around you to stand up for you. But the more we do it, the more we create a better environment for performance for everyone.
The aim of the next video is to give you some guidance in recognizing signs of abuse. This video is by no means a complete overview, but hopefully will give you an idea what to look out for. Looking after your teammate, your athletes, your colleagues is the most crucial part of the story. We will be talking about possible signs of abuse. We will be talking about whether you can be sure and what to do with this suspicion. When should you take action and how best to support your teammate. Signs of abuse, from emotional to sexual abuse, are not always specific. Not all of the signs I will mention here will be present. They can vary in degrees, and they can be other signs. Some signs can only be picked up by a professional. It's just an overview of some of the symptoms that may show if a person is being abused or mistreated. Persons that have been through abuse may show a variety of behavioral changes and signs of emotional distress. They can become very upset or agitated, or exactly the opposite. They can withdraw themselves, become very quiet. Look out for sudden changes of the normal behavior pattern. One possible change might be that a person suddenly stops caring about her or his appearance and shows self-neglect, both in the personal hygiene but also in their general well-being. They might stop clothing properly, they might stop eating properly. Some people start to direct aggression towards themselves, self-inflicted wounds, cutting themselves, or developing eating disorders are examples for this autoaggression. Also look out for changes in the interaction of your training team. A victim might be neglected or singled out, for example, in a team meeting where a person is not allowed to speak or being ignored. Physical signs might be bruises or wounds in various degrees of healing that cannot be explained properly. There might be a series of broken bones or sprains that go beyond the normal injury pattern of our sport. Victims might try to cover up those injuries by wearing long-sleeved shirts, or they might stop using common changing facilities for fear of detection. Victims may continue to train on an injury or take medication to continue training despite the injuries. Direct signs of sexual abuse are not easy to spot because it usually requires a very intimate knowledge that only a physician, a caregiver, or maybe a physiotherapist may have. Can I be sure? You see that a lot of victims are not able to talk about what they're experiencing because they might fear the consequences, or they might fear the perpetrator. There might be different reasons why people don't speak up. But please don't hesitate to ask uncomfortable questions, and don't hesitate to speak up, because the worst thing that can happen if you don't report it is that the maltreatment, the mental and physical abuse can go on. It's not really your job to decide whether it's abuse or not. You're neither a judge nor a policeman. You just need to pass on the information. So what do? Try to take the victim out of the abusive situation if it's an acute situation, or take the victim in a safe and comfortable environment. Give that person a chance to open up. If that doesn't happen, don't stop there. talk to the designated safeguarding person in your club or your federation. And if you don't have a safeguarding officer, try to find a person of trust who can take things further. How do you support the victim? What you can do is to offer help and re-offer help if being rejected. One important thing is that you listen, you don't interpret, you don't assume, and you don't ask leading questions. Let the victim open up to you. What you can do is offer help with the reporting procedures. Sometimes it's really scary to report and to open up, and a helpful person can be very reassuring. Thank you for listening, and in the panel discussion, we'll be happy to take your questions. Thank you. So, having heard about the signs of non-accidental violence, we need to turn now to the possible effects on victims. Especially long ongoing harassment is not something you leave behind easily once you end your rowing career, but it can have a long-lasting effect. I have asked an expert, Florian Mennigen, to give us an overview over those long-term effects. Florian Mennigen is a 2 times Olympian, having participated in Beijing and London. Amongst many medals, he won the gold medal with the men's 8 at the London Olympics. Florian has graduated at the Boston University in 2006 in psychology and continued his studies in Bochum, where he graduated as a psychotherapist for behavioral therapy. Since then, he's been working as a psychotherapist, a lecturer, and a teacher. I would like to hand now over to Florian. Hi, Florian. Thank you for talking to us. I just start straight away with the first question. In your opinion, what can be the potential effects of harassment and abuse in a short term and in a long term on the victim?
Hi, Lenka. Thanks for having me. Regarding your question, I think it is very important actually to differentiate between the two modes, short term or long term. And in the short term, usually harassment, depending on the intensity and the duration of the harassment, can be things like numbing or arousal, like hyperarousal, being very nervous or very anxious, being scared. Also, depending on if it's physical or verbal abuse or harassment, there are signs or can be signs, physical signs of harassment. I think we've talked about that earlier today as well. And in the long run, the effects can either kind of soften out a little bit, like people recover and heal from harassment if it wasn't too intense, not too long, but also it can evolve into like full-blown post-traumatic stress disorder, for example, where you see extreme numbing or hyperarousal, where you have flashbacks, intrusive thoughts and images in your head, where you're going through moments of harassment and abuse again and again, that you get triggered easily by just minor signals that remind you of the traumatic events. So that can be extremely serious and extremely harming for the victims of harassment and abuse.
In your opinion or your experience, can you distinguish between the effects of psychological or physical harassment? Or let me phrase it a bit differently. Is physical abuse always more serious than psychological abuse? Or can you say something about that?
Well, as a psychologist, I'm a little biased, I would say, towards the psychological effects, of course. And in my experience as a therapist, I often hear people saying that the psychological effects were actually almost more severe than the physical effects, because if you get hit or beaten or anything, the pain kind of goes away after a while and bruises heal, but the psychological wounds, the psychological pain that actually stays longer than.
So when you say the psychological effects are more long lasting, what therapy is there for the victims? What therapy would you recommend for the flashbacks or the reenactment of these traumatic situations?
There are very specific therapies for trauma if it is that extreme. I mean, having a full-blown post-traumatic stress disorder is, I mean, pretty intense, and I think harassment and abuse has to be very intense in order to develop into that extreme direction, but it definitely does happen. The kind of therapy you would usually recommend would be a specific trauma therapy, probably based on cognitive behavioral therapy, and also including specific methods like EMDR, it's called, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy, which is a therapy specifically developed originally for trauma therapy.
What kind of therapy would those with the slightly minor symptoms, what would be a good therapy for them?
In some cases, you don't even need a full-on therapy, and just counseling or speaking to a sports psychologist, for example, would be a good thing to do. Also, talking to your peers, friends, people you've got a trustful relationship with is extremely important. Having a network of support for you is super important. But yeah, in general, counseling can be a very good first step if you're suffering from day-to-day harassments, like just verbal abuse or the pressure during practices, during competitions. And I think every federation, every major program, or also the smaller programs, should have or even do have psychologists and counselors on their teams.
So, Florian, just as a finishing question, how important do you think it is to create an environment where talking about harassment and abuse, where creating a safe environment and a culture of mutual respect, how important is that in the fight, in the prevention of harassment and abuse?
I think it's super important, like having the environment to be open enough to speak up, I think is an extremely important precondition to allow individuals to actually seek help, speak up, open up. And also I think coaches and everyone involved with the sport is responsible to not only speak up for themselves, but also watch out for each other and just speak to each other and just get in touch with people where they're feeling, okay, that person could need help and doesn't really dare to speak up or dare to open up to somebody. So I think it's important to have that in the entire organization, in the entire program, just this feeling of responsibility for each other.
Great. Thank you very much for sharing your knowledge and your insight on that topic. It was really, really informative and will give us a lot to discuss on the next panel discussion. Thank you, Florian.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Lenka, for managing those interviews. Fantastic nuggets of information. And the participants, well, we've heard from our president, Jean-Christophe Roland, and his commitment. Great to have that kind of commitment for safeguarding from the leadership of the organization, and of course supported by the IOC's scientific director. Richard Budget. So really good to have that support and some real great nuggets of information coming through those interviews. Janine reminding us of the importance of the language we use, Katie's cool formula around performance equals motivation, skill, and environment. Emma reminding us of the need to embrace differences, and Johan giving us a practical suggestion there to set goals, not just for performance, but also for behavior. And Hannah, that recommendation for education, not just to understand, but education to stand up. Lenka, thanks as well for sharing those signs of abuse and some of the changes that we should be looking out for, and then what we can do as coaches working with rowers. And then closing off there with Florian, reminding us of the traumatic short-term and long-term impacts of harassment and abuse, and of course, some of the therapeutic interventions. So thank you very much, Lenka, for pulling that together. That was fantastic. So this is the time when you get to ask your questions, and I already see questions coming through. I'll start with the first one from Ahmed. Ahmed asks, how can we create a safe environment for the athletes? Is it from the sociological angle, or are there other forms of a safe environment? So Ahmed is asking us, how can we create that safe environment for athletes that we've been talking about? Anyone wants to have a go at that, panelists? Okay. Yep. Yes, Sandi, please jump in.
I could make a start, being a sports sociologist by training. It's a really good question, but like a safe environment includes not only relationships, so like the interpersonal relationships, but also the physical environment in which you're in. So like a safe environment includes all of the safety things that we talk about in rowing, plus the safety of the individuals involved and their safety with each other and with the coach. So that's the physical environment, the psychological environment between the athletes and between the coach and the athletes and between the coaches. That all, you know, acrimony amongst coaches doesn't help an athlete's development either. And also, so the physical, the social, and the psychological, I would say those three together, and that everybody is part of creating that environment. So everybody has to be positively building that environment.
Brilliant. So yeah, it's not one or the other, it's all of the dimensions of that space that you're at. Okay, thanks for that, Sandi. Okay, I think throughout the conversation and we're leading up to this, we have had these conversations when we talk about that balance of power with the coaches having that power, and then those very vulnerable athletes. And then we're saying that we want to create this balance. How do we create this balance? And Liz, thanks for your question, Liz. Liz says the importance of culture change was discussed as a way to mitigate bullying and harassment among teammates and peers. She's asking, what are some concrete steps that coaches and the leadership of organizations can take towards this culture change? Any suggestions there from the panelists?
I think I might start maybe echoing some of Johan's remark as well. It's really important to define your way, how you want to communicate, define your way, what are your values, how would you like your environment to look like, and then sit down with everyone. I think that resonated through the whole presentations. Sit down with everyone, discuss that, and get everyone to agree to what you've discussed, and then sort of sign off, and that becomes the code of behavior. That becomes your code, where you have to stick by. You're on mute, Mark.
Thank you, Lenka. Good. I think sometimes the less you hear from me, the better. I scroll down to the end. I'll jump back up to some of the other questions, but Ben, and it's related to this environment, and is it that we compromising performance because we're concerned about the other inherent qualities that are antithetical to health and safety? So I like his challenging question. Aren't we doing this to win gold medals? Aren't we doing this for, primarily around performance? And if not, then then what does that, as he asked, what does a course not aimed at performance look like in sport? So his question, and I'll read it for you now. When we say that we can have a safe environment that does not sacrifice performance, are we not acknowledging that the goal of performance has inherent qualities that are antithetical to health and safety? That good performance is not necessarily a good thing based on what it can take to achieve it. So if we can avoid many of these threats to health by avoiding performance as a goal, should we not pursue that course? What does a course not aimed at performance look like in sport? Tricky one. Anyone wants to have a go at that? That dilemma between focus on performance versus the well-being of an athlete. Is that a dilemma?
No.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Frida, you want to have a go there?
Yeah, I would just like to add that I don't think that safeguarding should take second place in coaching or in our athletes' drive to become the best and living the dream to become world champion or whatever they have as the highest goal. So saying that safeguarding is not equal with training 30 hours a week, I think it's on the same level. If you have a safe training environment, and if you create that safe training environment together with your coach, with your training group, and no matter what level you're at, I think you will be even more successful.
Absolutely, and I think there's sufficient research as well to support that, Sandi.
Yeah, there's the research that we have doesn't say that you will have better performance if you don't safeguard. And you've heard from Lenka and Frida, both have said, and Janine said in hers, that if you are a happier, healthier, more complete athlete, then when you come to perform, you bring all of yourself with you. So, you know, the potential for great performance is there if you have an athlete who feels complete and feels ready to perform, not one who's beaten down and struggling with issues. So safeguarding, you know, the research isn't quite there yet, but safeguarding and ability to perform seem intuitively really highly intertwined.
Yeah, I think we need to get that message across. I think it was just Janine who said great people make great rowers. Yeah, so, and oftentimes we only focus on that very narrow dimension of skill performance, and we neglect the other things, and that impacts negatively on performance. So thanks for that great question, Ben. Anybody else wants to add anything to that around that balance of the total focus on the total well-being? It's almost like an athlete-centered approach. Let's work on this whole athlete, and yes, we'll end up with a great performance.
Yeah, I might just add to that, where we talked about it, and Mehdi, you touched about it. It's very short-sighted just to focus on performance at every cost. Mehdi, you said that in one of our talks. It's really, if you want to have long-term effects, if you want to have long-term performance, you need to keep your athletes happy. It's just simple as that. If you don't keep the athletes happy, if they are training in a bad environment, if they're being bullied or being mistreated, they drop out of our sport. And if you want to create a long-lasting program which is really successful, it's everything. It's not just performance, it's also well-being.
Yeah, thank you, Lenka. Great. Lots of questions on the Q&A. So thank you, participants, for shooting those questions off to us. Safwat asks specifically about how we deal with autism athletes. So I don't know if anyone on the panel wants to have a go at how we can address more broadly, maybe persons with disabilities who we know are more vulnerable to harassment and abuse. Anybody wants to have a go there? Okay. Yeah, Lenka, you want to have a
yeah, it's a very difficult question. It's sort of the general question of how do we integrate people with disabilities, and that's a very valid question, because we want as much inclusion as possible, but people with disability and autism as well might have special requirements. And I think as a group, as a training group, as an organization, what we need to make sure is that those needs are being met. So if that person requires someone else who they're comfortable with, they can't talk to the coach directly because of their disability, because maybe of this autism, that there needs to be a person that is a stand between. And so we really, I don't think there's a general recipe for that, but what we need to do is to give those people with this disability, especially what they need. So just focus on that individual.
Yeah, I think, and Anna said we need to embrace differences, and I think because some groups are more vulnerable, it often means that we need to put additional support systems in place for groups.
If I may add something just on this point, I think as coaches, all coaches must educate their athletes, put rules, and what is their vision. So they have to create a safe environment, and what are the values promote within their teams. And so all the athletes must know that everyone has to be accepted. All disabilities, it's not about only autism, but all disabilities, or the club must be, or the team in general must be inclusive. So everyone has to be accepted and treated very well as equal. So, and that's on daily basis. The coach has to work on this as daily basis.
Thank you, Mehdi. Sandi, you wanted to say something there? So your hand up.
Yeah, just a short thought. Bruce Kidd once said, and it's stuck with me for years, that inclusion in sport is not about making sure everybody has an equal chance to get to the starting line, but making sure they have an equal chance to get to the finish line.
Love it.
And so it changes your thinking about what inclusion is. It's not just simply getting them there, it's having the welcoming environment that meets their needs. And sport has, our rowing is different because we have persons with disability in our sport. It's enriched our sports immensely. So it's embracing it in that manner, I think.
Great. Okay, just a reminder again that we want to keep these questions as general as possible and avoid any personalization and names of individuals and organizations. So Daniela, just a quick one then, responding to how long back will World Rowing be able to address issues of harassment and abuse? Can anyone respond to Daniela's concern there? How far back do we go? We do know that a lot of the survivors only share their concerns long after the abuse has happened. So Daniela's question, how long back will World Rowing deal with harassment and abuse? Any suggestions there? Yeah,
it's a tricky question, and it's I think in World Rowing we just established the safeguarding procedures, and we are well aware that sometimes it's really difficult for people when they're still training to speak up, and so there will be cases, and there might be coming in where harassment happened in the past, and it's always important to see where that happened. Did it happen on a FISA event? Did it happen in their home country? And what our goal is in FISA is certainly to help athletes to work through that problems and give them the best possible support. And again, it has to be decided on executed on an individual case by case.
Yeah, I think it's important to know that World Rowing, as with many other international federations, we're all still on a particular stage of our safeguarding journey. There are lots of things that we still need to put in place, but we're committed to doing that, and this is part of the journey. And I think we'll continue to be better at this as more people come aboard and continue to do what we're doing today. So there are two questions. Thank you very much, Lenka. There are two questions in the Q&A there that ask about the voices of survivors. One from Ahmed. Thank you for that, Ahmed, asking about that. And then one as well from, I think it's Leah. And Leah's question specifically, her concern that in her organization we have sports psychologists as part of the elite resource team. However, sometimes there's a concern that it's not a totally independent option for athletes to use because of that close relationship and collaboration between the psychologists and the coaches and leaders. And so sometimes athletes may be discouraged to even come forward to those who are appointed as the persons that they should be speaking to. So the question here around how can we be more supportive? What can we do, as Ahmed asks, to encourage survivors to talk? We heard a lot about that in the conference last
Yeah.
weekend. So if anybody wants to share anything there.
I can start. I think it's a good start within that federation, what they have implemented with the psychologist. But I also think it's really important from the athlete's view that they know that the person that is assigned to take care of safeguarding issues, for example, is someone neutral who doesn't work with either coaches or anyone in the board. This is a person that I can go to where I still feel safe to speak openly. I can mention names, etc. And then that person will take my report forward without names in the beginning and seek for the right help and way to handle it. So a psychologist is really good. No, I have nothing to say about that. But if I as an athlete are not safe with going to these persons, there should be someone else within the federation on club level or national team. That's my opinion as an athlete representative.
Thanks for that, Frida. I think at a global level, that's the direction that we're trying to move towards, to establish designated safeguarding leads at all member associations. So we'll get there. It's as I said, we're still
just add one thing, Mark.
Yeah.
That it's really important that we don't think we have all the answers within sport. You know, we can also reach to those outside of sport for support. So if you don't have an avenue of safety within sport, there is an avenue outside of sport. There are civil organizations and programs around you that will support you as well. So we should encourage that a bit as well.
Yeah, great. Thank you, colleagues. Julia asks, what should be the next step after listening to the athlete who is raising his concerns of mental abuse at home that impact his training and performance, but refuses to take any treatment? So a reference here to young athletes, particularly juniors, who are really scared as they think that what is at home is normal. So that type of abusive behavior at home, they think is normal, and they start to feel it is toxic. What advice do we have for coaches after listening to the athletes who's raised those problems? What recommendations can we give to those coaches? You want to have a go at that, Lenka or Mehdi?
Mehdi, you have got.
Yeah, I think it's a very difficult one, because especially if it's dealing with problems and safeguarding problems which happen in the club, it's one thing, and the problems come outside. I think it's different one. Even if the coach has to be very close to the athletes, know their athletes, know their problems, listen to them. But I think each case is different than the other one, and I don't know exactly. It has to be one by one cases. There's no general solution for this, but the main thing the coach has to know their athletes and listen to them, so, and know them exactly and know their problem.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. As a starting point, I think just being there to listen. Sometimes we need to remember that coaches are not necessarily safeguarding or child protection or experts in this particular field. And so that our first point is to listen. And I guess then next action would be if we have to then pass that on to an expert. And if, as Sandi suggested, sometimes that expertise may not exist within the sport organization, especially as we're still building the systems for safeguarding, but we can lean on other external sources for support. All right, great. Thanks, Mehdi. Susie asks, are there experiences and reflections that you can discuss of athletes, coaches, and volunteers coming into a new environment? So this is like an orientation. What additional or different environmental and attitudinal considerations should we give to newly involved people in the environment? And then she asked, what have these people said after their first year when the coaching environment is being reviewed? Okay, so I like this thinking. So that new people coming in, do we have that sort of an orientation that we should be providing for new, not just athletes and coaches, but also volunteers coming into our organization? Any suggestions there, colleagues?
I think what we, if I might just start, what we started in World Rowing is to have safeguarding courses which are targeted at different groups. And so we had a safeguarding course which was targeted at the FISA volunteers, the FISA council and commission members. We, Lucy, put together a course for the staff, the permanent staff in Lausanne. We have education modules starting like this for athletes, and there was a safeguarding module at the coaches conference as well for coaches. So yes, we're definitely looking out to give information to people from different groups, different aspects for the entourage, for the athletes in our sport. So yes, it's a great idea, and it's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we have more and more of those education awareness workshops and courses that are available online, and we need to encourage not just athletes and coaches, but volunteers, parents, everyone to learn more about what is good practice, what's poor practice.
Yeah, one thing that might be useful is to explain as the new people come through the door how welcome they are and the kinds of people they're going to run into. They're going to run into coaches, they're going to run into maybe some high performance athletes, they're going to run into some masters athletes. If they get into competitions, they're going to run into officials, team selectors and things like that. So explain what the environment looks like, sort of demystify it for them so that they can find their way as well. It's a negotiated relationship.
Absolutely. So yeah, agreed. And it's one of the areas that we've had gaps in coach education workshops, etc. So yeah, we need to be including this. All right, so we're winding down here, and I think this might be last point here. There's a question from Martha around taking action, and whether it's World Rowing or international federations taking action when high officials are involved in harassment or abuse. Is that something that we need? I mean, I can answer that, but I'll throw that back out to you guys. Maybe first, Mehdi, if you want to have a go at that. Is that something that we should be taking action on? What's our position on that from World Rowing in particular? Our position if we know of individuals who are involved, whether it's high-ranking officials, coaches, or even rowers who are involved in harassment and abuse. What's our position on that?
I think World Rowing is one of the most the first federations who started dealing with safeguarding, doing education courses. Rowing is pushing every time and at all levels to educate all people, all stakeholders. For example, in practical way, World Rowing is educating all, as Lenka said, everyone in World Rowing is educated. We've had many courses and webinars, seminars. We took part to all these just to be very well informed and take action and knows all what kind of problem we may face. And of course, on the other side, if something's happened, there is on World Rowing code of ethics, and there's safeguarding. If people follows all what happened in World Rowing Congresses, the last World Rowing rules include safeguarding and all these kind of procedures. So I think World Rowing is doing very well, and all these things are listed in details.
Yeah, and I think it requires a commitment from everybody. So that's a individual and collective commitment to not be bystanders, but to do, when you see something, say something, as they say. Colleagues, we're out of time now, and I really appreciate the rich conversation. I'm going to ask panelists for closing remarks. I'd start with Frida. Would you just, your closing more remarks, your take on all that we've been discussing today?
Yeah, I just want to say that don't forget to communicate, and please include athletes in all possible ways when it comes to training environment. And don't be afraid if athletes ask you as coach anything about training program, planning. I would say 99% of the cases, they are just interested and want to learn more. It's not about trying to go against you if you're a coach. So try to communicate and do more things together in the training group as coaches, athletes, and do it together. I think that will take you forward in a much better way and make you more successful as a training group.
Thank you, Frida. Mehdi, so your closing remarks? You're on mute there, man.
Yeah, sorry. So just remember, as on the coach perspective, just remember this. Our role as a coach is to create a safe and enjoyable environment for all the athletes. By promoting a friendship, team spirit, inclusivity, solidarity, fairness, so all the athletes must feel that they are home. Remember that an athlete in all sport, in different sport, may join sport for different reasons, but they stay because they feel welcome, they feel comfortable, they feel safe, they feel like home, they enjoy being in the club. If they face safeguarding problems, they will leave. So that's my, thank you very much.
Thanks, Mehdi. Sandi, I was going to ask you for a closing remark, but you've been real supportive.
I'm okay. Yeah, I would just like to echo what Frida said about including the athlete's voice. You know, wherever possible, you can co-develop training programs and values and guides for the year. I think that's a really important message that has come out here. I also think, you know, that organizationally, we are all interrelated, and therefore there are going to be conflicts of interest that come up when we deal with safeguarding. And we have to find mature ways to deal with that in our national federations and at World Rowing.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Sandi. And Lenka, your closing remarks.
Yeah, I think my closing remark is just goes out for all athletes. Just know your rights. We talked a lot about the power differential, that athletes usually have lower power, but we are the talent. We're the core of the sport, and I think if athletes stand together, they are a force to be reckoned with. And I think that goes for different cases, but really, really important in safeguarding. Know your rights.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And thank you all for being a part of this safeguarding webinar. To our participants for all the amazing questions and for engaging us in that Q&A, to our panelists, Lenka, Frida, Mehdi, and Sandi, and of course our support staff, Lucy, who's been a key person behind or pulling this off, and Ludovika and Brian in the background. Thank you very much for your support, and to our World Rowing President for leading this effort and for the support from the IOC as well. Colleagues, if your questions have not been answered live, we will be compiling a Q&A to publish on the World Rowing website, so you can check that out. We're also going to send you a survey shortly after this, sometime later this evening, and we'd ask you to complete, and that will help us improve the webinars as we move forward. So this would have been our second in the webinar series. So we just lost my screen here. This is the second in our webinar series. So we had the first one, which is now available. So if you missed the first one, it's on the World Rowing website, so you can have a look at that one. We do a run of this webinar 2 later this evening at 7 p. Central European time. So for others who may not have been able to attend, you can share this with your colleagues. And then our final webinar, the final in the webinar series on Friday, the 26th of March at 1 p.m. and 6 p.m. Central European time. So that one focuses on member federations, more around policy and procedures and so on. So you can share that as well. Colleagues, if you need further resources, you can see these on the screen now. They are also available on the World Rowing website. Thank you all for joining us today. We look forward to your continued engagement as we work together to make rowing safer for everyone involved. Do have a safe day. Bye.